Hello, my name is Miriam and I'm a philosopher from Sweden, and I'm talking to Rachel Fell, who is a coaching consultant in the US, and to Dyonne, who is a healer from Holland. And we're talking about personal development forever. 200 episodes, I'm sure. But today we wanted to talk about difference. And the difference between people. What makes people different? Are people different? Are we different from each other? Something is different, right? Something must be different, or is it? So from my perspective, this is when I think about difference, I think, among other things, I think about the second wave feminists in France who would spell différance with an A instead of an E, just to show something about the linguistic quality of difference and how our narratives play into this, who we are and what makes us special, and also the gaze of the other, how other people play into what makes us different. Other people make us different, possibly. Yeah. Right. Rachel.
Rachel is stewing.
Totally stewing. Yeah, I love that so much, Miriam. And for me, when I consider difference, the first thing that sort of comes up for me, or in my own sort of work in my own personal development, has been so the opposite then of difference would be sameness, if we look at this from sort of like more of a dualistic perspective. And one of some of the most fertile ground I've found for exploring difference has been when we're able to hold sameness and difference together. So not that they're mutually exclusive, but that they coexist, and that there are perhaps these sort of like this more transpersonal reality we can see in like binary zeros and ones, for example, right? Zero is a unified field, one has a value. And so I think there's this really interesting sort of, when we look at difference, there's no way to not also look at sameness at the same time, because they really are quite interconnected. And for me, that sort of, I don't have a good term for this yet, but the idea of sort of like non-duality, where there's non-duality at one end and duality at the other, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if it does.
Miriam.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I have to jump on the ones and zeros now. Again, from the feminist perspective, it's been brewing in my mind as well last couple of days. And it's just so fabulously interesting, this idea. I suddenly remembered a few days ago this text by Luce Irigaray, a French second wave feminist. And the article is called "This Sex Which Is Not One." And she talks about, it was one of my favorite texts all through university, and I had like underlined everything in extremely angry lines, and like this, it was a very difficult time for me. But but there was so much about the world of language and how we allow it to define us, and especially with these ones and zeros. And a part of this article, she says, the female explicit language warning, the female genitalia, it's not really explicit, but the female genitalia presents the horror of nothing to see. See? And then you suddenly say zero is a unified point and one is difference. Yeah. So I'm thinking like, the horror of nothing to see, it's a unified point. So that was my reaction when you were talking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's an amazing application. And I think that idea of zeros and ones through scale as well, right? So it's sort of like, what is the frame of reference? Like I often think about like consciousness and living beings. So it's like humans are different. We're also the same as, all other animals, mammals, for example, right? If we use that scope of reference. But then let's expand that idea to like all of consciousness, right? And look at mammals and, pine trees, for example, right? And so it really, that idea of zeros and ones through scale is just quite a fascinating one to explore. And I love the gender exploration. That's interesting.
And gender is, of course, all about the sphere of language, since it's not, it's like the not innate qualities, but we behave as though they are. Okay, that's a separate discussion Dyonne, do you want to cut in?
Yes, I want to cut in a way of what helps me. Well, language helps and language doesn't help. We talked about that before, obviously. But what helps for me is knowing that, or understanding, or not helps me. I believe that we're all one in regards to the spirit. We all come from the same source. But I, for myself, need to start a sentence with I, need to personalize myself, need to show my own individuality in daily life when it comes to a level of my emotional world, my inner landscape, or a topic that we talked about last time, like professionally, how I show up in the world in daily life. I need my differenceness, my differentness. I need to be able to differentiate myself before I I think that's actually very important for myself, and especially because working in the field of spirituality, it's very easy to say about everything, well, all is one and all is just an experience, and and nothing really matters in the end, and we're all non-dual. So when you abuse the term also non-duality, it also can become very dangerous, is my belief. So for me, it's very important to distinguish when I talk about myself from an emotional point of view and a mental, from a mental concept, or from how I show up in the world. And in terms of my spirit, I'd like to engage like we're all one. For instance, to make it more concrete, if I look at the both of you, I lose track of the fact that we're speaking English. I'm forgetting that you're in the US and you're in Sweden and I'm in the Netherlands. I forget all of that. None of it matters. So in terms of that, when we start engaging with each other, I lose the concept of Dyonne as a healer in the Netherlands. And we are all one, because like I tap into your brain, and your field, and Rachel, you love the fractaling bit, everything unfolds, and I can stay here in a sense of timelessness with the both of you. And when this is done, I need to go back to my me-ness, to Dyonne-ness, and feel a difference there when I engage in my grounded self, in my form, in my shape. But now being with the both of you, I let go of that and I feel the oneness.
Oh,
I love that so much.
I do too.
Sorry.
No, please don't apologize. Please don't apologize. You're making me think about the space between. I'm quite I have yet to figure out the terms or like language to really explain what I mean when I use non-duality. I guess I mean it in a sort of embodied sense, like, that idea of sovereignty and separateness. And that's very, very important. And it's like a condition of sort of like consciousness with physical form, I think, right? Like humans have sovereignty. We are these sort of like individuated experiences. I don't know if either of you are familiar with Star Trek, but I think about the Borg and like assimilation and the idea of like individuation and collectivism. It's both, right? Like we can't exist without that separation. But what you're speaking about, Dyonne, I think is like this fluidity, right? Like the co-created space between, there's all of the oneness, right? And then there's like all of the separateness, and between, in some sort of dimensional reality, there is this like co-creative experience where we're flowing and kind of embodying that oneness or connection and that separateness in a dance, maybe, of sorts. I'm not sure.
Oh, I have two thoughts I need to share. So one is
I resonate.
One is from a philosophy conference, and we were 20 philosophers in this room, and we were trying to think of a question that we would all do like a Socratic discussion about, with these open-ended questions. So we were all writing questions on these little pieces of paper, and we put them on the floor, and then we would pick them. We tried to find the one that the most people wanted to talk about, and the one that won was, how do you bless the spaces in between? So that was the first thing, and then we had lots of answers to this, and some some philosophers, like the Nordic country philosophers, except me, of course, because I'm a spiritual person, they said, I don't like the word bless because it implies religiosity or something like that. And the spaces in between, what spaces in between? You know, and we tried to talk about how the magic happens in the spaces in between, like the spaces in between your philosophical counseling sessions and things like that. So that was my first thought. And then I also thought about Dyonne, when you said the way we meet here and we forget ourselves and our time and space. But the thing that keeps us ourselves is the reflection, right? The ability, the conscious ability to say, I am here right now. Because if we completely lose that, it's kind of like a psychosis situation, right? So the subconsciousness is what both keeps us our tentacles together like this, and it keeps us separate, right? Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit
Yeah.
hyper today, I feel. But
the space between the connective tissue, right? Like, I think I've mentioned this before, but I think it's just so fascinating how, you know, where chemistry ends and biology begins has everything to do with the cell wall and the sort of the interplay between the microtubules and the cells and the structure of the cell wall. And sort of like, again, you see the zeros and ones at different scales and in different ways, right? And that's just so fascinating to me. Like, without this interplay, potentially, like without this ability to be and to be in relation, right? Would there be such a thing as consciousness at all? So maybe, you know, perhaps sameness and difference is a condition that we need to have in order to have this experience of being human or being conscious.
What about this strange two-ness of things? Because the one and the zero, they are two, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the duality and the either or kind of, and the outside or inside of these cell walls. What is this?
And the dark and the day. I mean, the dark and the light, and the night and the day. We need the opposites to exist. Otherwise, there's no reality, no truth to that.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. And this is where language falters. Like, I don't quite have the terminology yet. So zero as a unified field where potentially there is no duality. So one has a value. And so if I have 1 and 1, I have 2, right? But if I have 0 and 1, I do have 1, but I also have a fundamental difference of sort of like what I would call unit type.
Yeah, you solved it.
You solved it.
Yeah, you solved it, because that also makes possible this whole thing that we talked about another time, the possibility to see that paradoxical positions are true at the same time.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
that is the two that is actually just one.
Yes.
And before we go,
the fake
everything reduces to one.
Yeah.
Like in mathematics, and if we start exploring, so this is what I mean when, like, I'm getting chills. I'm looking for a term for this, because, you know, non-duality does not suffice, and it has quite been you know, as a term, as all language is subject to, like, you know, subjective interpretation and sort of collective meaning and connotation, which evolves over time, et cetera, right? But there's this idea of like 0 and 1 as this sort of like non-dual and dual state together. And that in and of itself, there's like a tension and a reconciliation, but that as the basis, I guess, is sort of what I'm suggesting, right? And then from there, we're playing inside of the one, as you know, as we move through. So 1 and 1 is 2 is also 1, and then so on and so forth.
That is so interesting. And we've focused, so we gave such prevalence to the one. We always did. This is like the lesson from feminism, right? We gave prevalence to one and to the visual sense, and you know, and we forgot about all the other ones. But there's so much more, and there's so much like potentiality and like infinite potentiality and creation there. It's so interesting. And the way we translated these concepts to sort of who am I, and what does it mean to be me, and what kind of mother do I have to be, and it's quite crazy how we've convoluted the reality of stuff and just made it live. We moved into this sphere of language, and then we didn't leave. And we were like, this is all. This is everything.
There's an example stuck in my head. I have to get it out there, because when I say it, you'll understand how annoying it is to have language, or to that language falters. I have to go back to the time when I was in college, when I got my bachelor for commerce, and I had law as a subject. And with law, I understand very well for myself why I never studied law, because with law, it's like this. You have the book, and it's like, well, it's article number 32. And if there's this, and then there's that, but that excludes that. And it doesn't mean that that is that, and this and that, but that it does not mean that. And it does mean this, but it also means that. And so like this whole thing is all about what it is and what it isn't, but it can only exist by what is not and what is not. Well, you understand what I try to say, like the difference in difference, but it can only be something, or it can only be not something without the other thing. And like the whole, like all these laws, and they all consist as such. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is annoying. How can I practice something when I have to keep on looking everything up and what's included and excluded? And so that was always such an annoying thing for me. Like, and actually in there, it's like language keeps on what you say, language falters, but I was about to say another thing. I will let that go. But you get the picture, like how this is annoying and how it's actually not defining anything. It's only excluding and including. That's the point. Yeah.
Yes. And it makes everything irrational. So your task as a lawyer is to learn the matrix as well as you can. But it's not reality. It's like this language matrix of relational concepts. And,
Thank you.
And these man-made rules, like roads.
Yeah.
We put this line here and we drive on it. And if you don't, we will, it's dangerous, obviously, because you can kill someone. But it's these laws that we made up.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, that brings me back to like the idea of being able to hold paradox in the 0 and the 1 and being a human. It's like there's a level of like correlational to personal development. I feel like harmonic defiance, like that's part of being human almost, is sort of like asking these questions. A lot of this stuff quite feels rooted in human exceptionalism, these constructs and this focus on the form, this desire. I think it's born out of a desire to explore and to be curious, but somewhere along the way of the journey, and we can talk about the patriarchy and white supremacy and all of these things, right? It became an obsession with form, and it became reductionist. It became something that didn't allow space for the mystery or for possibility. It shifted from curiosity to something a little more insidious, something a little like dark is not the word I want to use, but something a little bit more.
Ego.
Yeah. Well, being comfortable with the mystery, or being comfortable with what we don't know. I wonder, it seems like that quite plays in as well, right? Why is questioning, why is asking why so vilified or sort of dangerous,
And where is the awe and wonder? And so if you can, the trick is to be able to say, really, is this happening for something that happens every day, and then explore that. And it has this element. Part of it is your innate quality that you can refine, your curiosity and your sense of like amazement, or the thing that will make you more interested, still more interested, ever more interested, more.
Because the divine is in the mystery. The divine is in the waiting for the answer. The divine is in the letting it be as it is, whatever it is. I mean, but the why is a construct of the mind again, and it's okay to be curious. But if the why is serving the ego, like, okay, when I know it, I'm in control and I can obsess about it, then it's the dark side of it, as you say, Rachel. I mean, that's how I take it.
And I struggle a little bit too with like dark and light as well, because, I think like again, language is in this place that things have become so turbocharged, and it's so interesting. I often think that the friction we feel inside of language has to do with, we're trying to reconcile and create a collective reality using these sort of somewhat crude tools, that have sort of like lost their meaning at the collective level. And I would suggest that that is like due to some sort of like lack of connectivity, right? Like the more isolationist, the more individuated cultures around the world have become, the more we see ourselves as separate, the more language perhaps loses its meaning. But I think it's really interesting how, the divine or the mystery is in both the zero and the one, and that to be able to see the dark aspects of something, or like, what Jung would call shadow work, and taking that and like
Yes.
transmuting it into the light, that's where the curiosity kind of
Yes.
lives. That's where we grow.
Yes.
That's where we evolve.
Yes.
When we can take, so the word, I only take this slight off ramp to talk about,
Oh,
the
it's
terms
fine.
light and dark are quite charged as well, right? Like night and day, we need dark for, seeds to grow and germinate and to thrive and to sprout, right? So I don't know.
But
Yeah.
that's the healthy dark. That's the necessary dark. It's different than the how do you say, the obscure dark. The obscure is using spirituality in a wrong way, or obscure, like even like black magic or something. But what you call the dark in terms of shadow work, that's the, how do you say, the healthy dark, the necessary dark, but yes, yeah, in a way.
And that some sort of now we're into sort of where non-judgment and some sort of cosmic morality or like universal law might intersect potentially,
Yeah.
which is a conversation for probably another time. But it is interesting because like we can't talk about difference and sameness without exploring some of those things, right? Like I would say for me, I sometimes wonder, you can look at light and dark as a 0 and a 1. You can also look at it as a 1 and a 1, right?
And
interesting.
It is, so another philosophy conference, there was this talk, a guy talked about philosophizing through dissonance. And this is, that's another thought I had, because one part, like I said, is this innate quality that you can cultivate by yourself or in sort of with others in coaching, your sense of curiosity about the world, and being able to notice things that you didn't notice yesterday. And think that they're interesting and want to explore them. But another part is seeing the value in this kind of chafing and dissonant qualities of like when things don't quite work. Because, and this is also the growth, right? We need
that's
this.
the friction again. That's the
going?
friction again.
Tension.
The necessary friction.
Tension.
Yeah, tension. Yeah.
Connective tissue, positive disintegration, right? Is there growth without that sort of tension, that discomfort, that friction, and like how do we approach that? I think that's can we be curious about those spaces as well in a way that allows us to grow and evolve? Like I always use surfing. Like, can we surf the tension, the resistance, the friction? Let's talk about like proprioception, like knowing where we are in time and space in our bodies, but also in our growth.
And knowing our like if we're all instruments in an orchestra, so knowing what tune am I playing right now, and what do I need to adjust to, so I'm not off key anymore. Sometimes it's like we're off key for 20 years and we're like,
No, I don't. No. I can't relate. No.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but I mean, it can be like that, and then so that is what that's the other analogy about the ones and the zeros, and how it's and the infinite, in that it's never just like one. It's like that's not the interesting picture. That's not interesting. But that's what we're doing, and that's what we've been doing in society for like hundreds and hundreds of years, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So the new age is different. That's where we're more like the orchestra, because where the orchestra is the one, and the music is the zero.
Yes. Well, and you bring up an interesting point, which reminds me of what Dyonne said earlier, which is like in relation to what, right? Because we're existing and the gaze, right? So it's like the three of us are existing in relation with each other right now in this conversation. And when I leave and I go outside for a walk, I'll be existing in relation to the nature outside. I'll be with myself. So it'll be myself and, the outside. But I think that is, constantly evolving and shifting. So back again to sort of like knowing where you are in time and space. What are you existing in relation to? Yeah.
And your reflection, your little mirror that you hold up and say, like, this is where I am now, and this is how I feel now, and this is what I project right now as well.
And all these different situations and states of being and moments of relating to other people or to nature or to an animal or to the weather or to a job, they are all necessary for personal development.
Mhm.
I think this
Yeah.
is a nice end for part 1, right?
I think so too. I think so too.